Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right to podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Before we begin today's episode, we want to give a content warning. This conversation may include discussion of childhood sexual abuse, adult sexual abuse, addiction, suicidal thoughts, and recovery. These topics may be difficult or activating for some listeners. Please take care of yourself while listening. Step away if you need to, and know that support is available. You can visit ihavetheright2.org/resources for a list of support services and hotlines. Welcome back to the Aspire podcast. I'm Katie Shipp, and today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. It's a privilege to be joined by an extraordinary guest whose story and work will stay with you long after you've finished listening. But before we dive in, I'm thrilled to introduce my co-host for today's episode, someone I greatly admire and who brings a powerful perspective to this space. Karen Udall is the program director at I Have the Right To and mother of a survivor. After her daughter bravely disclosed her abuse, Karen made the decision to return to school to study forensic psychology, determined to build a world where fewer children have to walk the path her family did. She now uses this expertise every day to support survivors and drive forward the mission at I Have the Right To. Karen, I'm so glad you're here today and for your first episode co-hosting with me.
Thank you. I can think of no better author to start co-hosting with you. This is fantastic.
All right, and now to our guest, Dr. Stacey Hettes. Stacey is a professor of biology and neuroscience at Wofford College in South Carolina, where she is known for her rigorous but inspiring classes and for mentoring the next generation of scientists and medical professionals. She holds a PhD from the University of California, Riverside, and is the youngest recipient to date of the Millikan Award for Excellence in the Teaching of Science. Stacey is also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. When she was 5 to 8 years old, she was repeatedly abused by the deacon at her church, who was also a family friend. She disclosed it to her parents at the age of 10. In her stunning debut memoir, Dispatches from the Couch, she writes with raw honesty and vivid clarity about the moment her past collided with her present. What began as a stand against a colleague's harmful comments during a forum on sexual violence turned into a deeply personal reckoning. The book takes us alongside her, not just as Dr. Hettes, the dedicated professor, but as Stacey, a woman re-entering the hardest corners of her childhood through therapy, memory, and healing. In her book, Stacey takes us with her on her deeply personal journey with her therapist, Piper, to reboot her brain. Stacey, thank you so much for being with us today.
Katie, I wish you had written the back blurb for my book. That was perfect, and I appreciate it so much. Karen, it's so nice to meet you, and I just want to thank you both, but also thank I Have the Right To for all the incredible work you're doing. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. That means so much. I'm really excited to dive in today. I enjoyed your book and I read it in a weekend, which is quite the feat since I have two little ones constantly pulling for my attention. But I just was glued to it, and it really is so powerful. And really just you share so much. So for those of our listeners, though, who haven't had the chance to read your book yet, I'd love for you to share with them how the book starts, what your colleagues' comments brought up, and what led you to get back into this therapy and to this journey that eventually led to writing the book.
Well, it starts the day after a very intense, I would say almost traumatic brain injury in a way. It wasn't a physical brain injury, but it was a mental brain injury. I had been serving as an administrator at my college as an assistant dean. And so I was in that sort of middle ground of having a little bit of power and a little bit of voice, but still very much beholding to people with much greater authority. And I was in a meeting that was addressing the sexual violence forum that you mentioned in your intro and the sort of aftermath of that. And the person I was in the meeting with basically wanted me to take responsibility for sort of cleaning up the mess of this that it had caused in our campus community. And it was not my job. It was not at my level of authority. But he said, "You're the one with the authentic voice." Because I had disclosed in that forum that I was a survivor. And it changed the tone of the forum. It changed the nature of the outcome of the forum. But it didn't mean that I had any more power than I did before. And it didn't mean I had any more responsibility than I did before. And so the book opens the day after that meeting when I woke up, and it was as if my brain's response to everything that had been happening over the last several weeks had just manifested in this incredibly intense response. I was scared. I was overwhelmed. I was anxious. I was just absolutely beyond my rational ability to sort of calm myself down. And so I called my mom because that's what we do. And I know, Karen, that you probably have been on this end of those kind of phone calls, and I appreciate your position in that. And I just said, I'm right back where I started. I'm right back where I started. I'm right back where I started. And that's what it felt like. It felt like a complete regression back to the time before all the years of support from my family and work with therapists and efforts to sort of overcome what I had been through as a child. And so it starts with a pretty intense regression, I would call it. And then it becomes the story of trying to get my bearings again, get my footing again.
Thank you. I like much of the time that I felt when I was reading, there are moments just in your statement where I think, oh, I've lost my breath. As a mom, it is challenging, but I stand so firmly with survivors. And I have been through the therapy journey with my daughter and for myself as a secondary survivor. So in the book, you discuss that it was not your first time diving back into therapy. You had other therapists and counselors that you worked with in the past. Some were helpful, some were effective, others not so much. You even said that you quit going to therapy at different points. And I thought your term here was interesting. You said you quit going at different points because you were happy enough. So can you share with us what made this time in therapy different? What would you say to survivors about the benefits of therapy and even the challenges of continuing past the point where you think you just can't keep going?
Oh, Karen, that's a great question. And there's a lot of components to a full answer to that. First, I'll focus on myself and say that I was this time in my mid-40s when I was going back to therapy. And so I had a very different understanding of my agency, that I was making this choice for myself, even if it didn't feel like a choice at the time because I was so desperate for help. But there was something about doing this as an independent and even financially independent adult. But I will say, too, that our entire culture's attitude toward therapy has changed tremendously in the 20 years since I had been in a therapist office. And that is one of the most important things that books like mine, and I think work like yours and books like Chessie's has helped us understand as a society, is that therapy is nothing to be ashamed of. And it is also more like, I think, the other things we call therapy in the medical realm than going to the doctor's office. So I have two sisters. One is an occupational therapist and one is a physical therapist. And they have clients they have been seeing for years because the conditions that those clients experience warrant a weekly or a biweekly interaction with a physical or an occupational therapist. They have other clients who have an injury and they recover from that injury and they say, okay, we've completed our work and we're going to say we're finished. And that can be true of psychotherapy as well. There are times that therapy ends because you've addressed the issue that you needed to work through. And there are other times, like I'm experiencing now, that I may be continuing with therapy for the rest of my life, and that's okay. I don't have to make that decision. It's just something I can work through. The other thing I think that we need to speak to as a society is our support for therapy financially. I have the absolute privilege of having a wonderful insurance plan through my work that there is no cap or limit on the number of sessions that I can attend. I have the privilege of having a good job where I can pay that copay without keeping milk bones out of chili and peppers life, because that's, I don't have kids to feed, but I have dogs to feed. And so I also want to say that we need our insurance companies and whatever other social support we have to treat mental health as important as physical health. And that's been something that I have the privilege of. And I think, too, I also had the ability to see my parents from a different perspective as an adult. And so even though they have been from day one of knowing about my past, incredibly supportive and encouraging of going to therapy, it became somehow different when I was able to talk to them as an adult child rather than a child, because I wasn't so worried that I was going to say something that was going to upset them, or that there would be something that came out that was still supposed to be a secret. And secrets, as we all know, are unfortunately a big part of how abuse gets perpetuated and how it can have an impact on survivors.
That's an interesting thought about that. I had similar experiences with my daughter when she was going through therapy in high school, and it was me kind of pushing her to go. And then when she went to college and she went on her own, the acceptance of the help through therapy, the acceptance of what she'd been through, and being able to turn things around for herself and take on her own healing journey. Now, 8 years later, she's a different person, but I'm a different person because of the conversations that we get to have. So thank you for sharing that.
I really appreciate that you're here with us, Karen, because I almost would like to have a chance to have my mom on a podcast with me. And so this feels a little bit like a surrogate, and I appreciate that. We just had a vacation together, and we just had a lot of long talks. It was our first time face-to-face since the book came out. And just the ability within my own family to speak more freely has been such a blessing. And even with my sisters, we all are talking. They laughed about how I came up with their pseudonyms, because I changed every person's name in the book except mine and mom and dad, because you can't change mom and dad to something else. But I also really appreciate, Karen, you talking about being a secondary survivor, because that's really something I tried to get across in the book, that this happened to us as a family. And the dedication in the book is to my mom, because she was absolutely my most essential and closest core support. And I just say that it's to Mom, and that we win, that it wasn't just me overcoming, it was us overcoming. And that meant the world to me, to be able to express that and feel that.
Thank you.
There was an article that came out, I don't know, shortly after Chessie had come forward, and she was going through the criminal trial and eventually the civil trial, and it was a therapist, I think, that wrote it, and he wrote about how the outcomes for survivors are so dependent on the support that they receive when they disclose, and having somebody who believes you and is there with you and maybe doesn't do all the right things or says all the right things, but just is that constant support. And, you go on that journey together. That was beautiful, Stacey. Thank you for sharing that. In your book, you share a pro tip for therapists, which I'm going to share in a moment, but I also am a strong believer. I think everyone in our org is of therapy, and I've had my own therapy journey and have had, multiple different therapists, and I really believe, honestly, everybody should be in therapy. I think it's important. I talk to my kids about therapy very openly when I go to my therapist and tell them that it's good. Just like you go and a doctor helps you with your boo-boos, you go to a therapist and you talk about your emotions, and that's really important. But you had said that a pro tip for therapists is showing some emotion will not blow your cover, and it will actually build trust. And in your book, when people read it, there's such beautiful trust between you and your therapist, Piper. And when you wrote this, it struck me as such a simple yet powerful truth. Can you expand on what you believe makes someone, whether it's a therapist, a teacher, or a friend, truly safe for a survivor to be around? And what does real support look like in practice? And also, how did Piper's initial reactions to sharing your story make you trust her?
That is a great question. And again, it's one that probably has a lot of layers of answer. But let's start with the friends, because I think friends and colleagues are people who you often have a pre-established relationship with. And so they can be the people that you can talk to first. And being the type of person who listens and being the type of person who just is trustworthy, who lives by a set of values of respect and integrity, makes you the person who somebody can trust and who they're going to be more likely to come to you. And those are the things that we see in therapists as well. And so what makes you a good human is what makes a good therapist. And I've had great therapists in the past, people I trusted, people I could develop a sense of not just trust, but understanding with, that somehow they were able to show me that this wasn't something that was going to overwhelm them, but that they were going to take to heart. Because we can't, people who are very empathetic like me, and I believe us, I can tell already from just talking with you, we can get overwhelmed quickly with something that is a surprise to us. And so a therapist has to be able to sort of navigate all of that without ever becoming desensitized to it, or trying not to let the client see them as not being affected. And so it's a delicate balance, and there's probably a continuum of what's going to be a good fit. And that's why we need lots of therapists, and we need the opportunity to say, I think this isn't a good fit. Could you refer me to someone else? On both ends, for the therapist to be able to say, we're probably not going to be able to do the work that I think you need to do. Let me refer you to someone else, or vice versa. Because I talk about a therapist I had in college and high school, Dr. Marianne, I call her in the book. And she knew her stuff. She really did. But I also needed somebody who could tell me I wasn't broken, because I really felt broken at the time. And adolescents feel broken and confused and overwhelmed and all the things. And she didn't want to do that. It was as if what happened to you is not a big, not that it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a unique experience, I think, was the message she was trying to get across. But she just wasn't connecting with me with that message. Somebody trying to say that could be doing something very effective by telling you you're not alone is different than saying you're not unique. And so those kind of things need to be really that level of nuanced discernment that we need to teach therapists in their graduate programs, but also that they need to cultivate and develop through their practice. And I have more recently started calling Piper in public that it almost feels like she's my unicorn, because we are such a good match. And I'm so grateful that I found her. But I know that there are other friends I would never suggest her for, because they would not be a good fit, but they could find their own unicorn. And so that's the kind of thing I try to tell people about therapy now.
I think that's also when somebody's starting their therapy journey, that's something I always try to tell them. Like, the first therapist or even the second therapist might not be the right fit. Like, just like we pick friends or partners or whoever in our lives, like, personalities sometimes just don't match, and I had two different therapists, and then I met my therapist that I go to now, and I've been going to her now for 8 years, right? Because it is that fit. But being willing to say, maybe it's not working with that therapist, but not that therapy isn't working, and trying to like keep people because it's hard, right? Like, you go and you share all this stuff, and then you're like, oh, you're not the right fit. Oh, now I need to go and share all this stuff again and hope that you're the right fit. And, trying to convince people like it's worth the journey of trying to find, just like it's worth the journey to find like an amazing friend, like it's worth the journey to find that and like stick with it. So thank you for sharing that.
I wish everybody could see Karen and I just shaking our head. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And that comparison to a friend, I think, is important, because you do have to have that level of trust and intimacy. And also, that's why therapists have to be in control of those boundaries, because we need to feel that closeness, and they need to safeguard and protect the professional relationship at the same time, because it is different. It's not just a friend. It is somebody who is there with a particular set of professional skills and goals to help you.
Definitely.
I would definitely was nodding my head ferociously as I was listening to that, because it is so hard to start over each time. But when you find the right fit, it really makes a difference. If it's okay with you, I'd like to read an excerpt from your book, which tacks right onto this. So we just talked about what would we tell others about going to therapy, and I want to kind of hone in on a specific situation that you shared. So it reads, Piper asked you to tell her what makes you think you are a bad person, or what makes you think you are bad. And you replied that you weren't strong enough to deal with things on your own. You told your parents, and it ruined your mother's life. And here's where it really got me. You went on to write, Piper does not respond with words right away, only the kindest facial expression one could imagine. She has all the proper degrees and training, but her best tools are her eyes, her whole demeanor. It fills the room with empathy. With Piper, I feel cared for in a way the walls I've built around myself rarely allow for. And in my notes, Stacey, I wrote whoosh. That was all I could write, was whoosh. It just took my breath away. So to know that early on that your therapist truly had your best interest at heart, she lived that fully in all of your sessions, which seemed to provide you that level of safety that you maybe hadn't fully felt before. What impacted me in my reading is this moment where it took my breath away. So what I would like to know is, are there specific moments that you can look back on and say, this particular moment or set of moments really took your breath away? They changed your life through this process.
Oh my goodness, there's so many of them. And I'm very lucky to have a good memory because I was able to recreate them in the book. And there are sentences and lines that I know I had to reconstitute, but there are others that I know are verbatim, the way she said it. But you did hit on one of the most important aspects, and I'm so grateful you brought that up because it is more than just words. And it is especially more than just questions because it's the response to those questions and response to your answers and the dialogue that develops from that becomes so very important in this type of dialectical therapy. I will add too that I think it is important that you think about the environs that you're inviting someone into and the space you are creating for them. Since I wrote about Piper's office not having throw pillows, she has throw pillows now. And I talk about another therapist, my therapist, Dr. Fedora, I call him in college. He had the best throw pillows. He basically had, like stuffed animals that were disguised as throw pillows, because you need that something to hold on to. You need that. And I think it would be okay for us to bring our own stuffed animals with us if we wanted to, even as adults. Or what do the kids have now today? Katie, you'll know the squishmallows. Is that? Yeah, I think those would make...
Yeah, we have so many squishmallows in our house. My son, he just is totally obsessed with stuffed animals, and I can't even get rid of one because he remembers what every single one, the names for them and who got them and where he was. And so I'm overwhelmed at squishmallows at this point, but they are very comforting and very nice to hold and snuggle. So
yeah, I think, bringing some of those into your therapy office would be a fine thing too. But I say all that to say that creating that overall environment, that sense of comfort, and even the squishy couch cushions that for someone with my size and arthritic knees sometimes are a little hard to move out of. But it doesn't feel like you're in a doctor's office. It feels like you're in a space where you are being given every sensory stimulus that can make you feel comfortable. And so all of that comes together to provide that sense of safety, that sense of this is a place to put down my burdens for at least a little while. And that all plays into that sense of I'm going to hold on to your burdens for you and give you a chance to just process and sometimes just breathe. And so some of the most important sessions were really the ones where we didn't say a whole lot. And those were a little harder to convey in the book, but they were there. And another one I will say that was a really important turning point, and it happens fairly early on, and it did happen fairly early on, was when I had a panic attack at the end of a session. One thing that Piper and I differ on is our relationship to time. I am a very time-focused person. I like to be on time. I like to be finished on time. I set a timer so that my classes end on time and I don't roll over into their time to move on to their next class for my students. And Piper sees time as a suggestion. And so she will let a session roll over into her 10 minutes in between if she thinks it's necessary. And sometimes she will just lose track of time. And I've been on both ends of that, where I've been in the waiting room waiting, and I've been the one causing the next person to wait. And the time that it happened, and I didn't realize this, it was so early on, and I just had a full-blown panic attack over taking someone else's time because I knew how important this time with her was to me. She just did not let it faze her in any way, shape, or form. There was nothing more important in that moment than helping me make my way back from this overwhelming experience of just losing touch with reality. I mean, that's what it felt like. And that was a huge trust moment for me too, because I was not in a place where I was accepting these experiences and limitations and the impact they were having on my life. I was still really annoyed that my younger self showed up with all these memories and with all these emotions. And I was just in it to get back on track. But luckily, through all of that, we were able to realize I could take a different path, and life is much better since I have.
I think that's such a good reminder too of just when somebody is really going through something, I think it's human nature to want to fix it for them or to say something that's going to like somehow make them feel better. But a lot of times somebody just needs you to sit with them, and just hear them and be there and just let them feel the feels and be a safe space. So I'm so glad that she was that for you. And I hope every survivor has at least one person in their life that can be that for them, because you need that, right? And especially when you're in that trauma response, you're not going to hear anything somebody's saying to you anyway. You're just not. You just need somebody to just help you sort of get your nervous system back to like a normal state. So there's a portion of your book that reminded me of a conversation I recently had with a board member who is also a male survivor of childhood sexual abuse. We were discussing triggers and how something that seems so minor to others can cause someone to have a very strong reaction, whether it's a certain smell or sound, the smell of somebody's perfume, or, a certain kind of scent or a song. And how it can sort of bring you back to another moment, whether it's a positive or terribly negative. And especially for survivors, how that can impact their lives and how society often doesn't understand that. So, for example, in your book, you described that during college, there was a counselor who had a mustache, and that mustache triggered you because it reminded you of the abuser. And eventually, the counselor became someone you included on your, quote, list of the people who deserve credit for my survival. But the two of you had to work together to overcome that initial hurdle. So I'd love for you to talk about how everyday triggers operate for survivors. And I'd love to hear about it as, a survivor point of view, but also neuroscience point of view, right? And just how we can better understand that. And just a reminder to everybody that it's not something you just get over, and it's something you carry with you and live with. And, something seemingly small to someone else can really trigger something big.
Katie, is it okay if I get a little neuroscience-y on this response?
I would love that.
Okay.
My freshman seminar in college was about neuroscience, and it was the man who mistook his wife for a hat.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And so I love neuroscience stuff. So please.
So we'll talk about let's make it 4 areas of the brain. You have your thalamus, and that's where your sensory experiences all make their way into your brain, and except for smell. So smell comes in a different way because it's much, much older. So everything's sort of getting filtered through this one spot. It's almost like a train depot where it's all going to the right place. But it tells us how important those sensory experiences are. The next place I'll talk about is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the site of learning and memory. And the hippocampus is sitting very close to the thalamus, and they're very tightly connected. The amygdala comes in. I talk more about the amygdala in my book than some of the other areas. The amygdala is where your fight or flight response comes from. It is your danger detector and your danger responder. And our response to danger is manifested as fear. And so we really associate the amygdala with fear. The amygdala has direct connections to the hippocampus, but also direct connections to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is where your whole body response sort of gets manifested. It connects to your endocrine system so that all your hormonal responses can start. And then the final area, maybe I'm saying 5, I maybe said I'd do 4, but I'll do 5, is called the orbitotemporal cortex. I think I got that one right. It's been a while since I looked it up, but it's a separate part. Name's not as important as what it does. It is a part of our mammalian and primate brain, so more developed, more human-like, that particularly recognizes faces. I get to talk about in one of my neurobiology classes that if you flash up a picture of a rhesus monkey's face, or a toilet bowl brush, that's sort of shaped like a face head, to a research subject, the area that I just described in the cortex, if you show them the face, will light up. And if you show them the toilet bowl brush, it really won't. So it's not just the shape, it's that there's this face. There's the two eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Well, anytime there's a change then to the face, that can be a little confusing to that cortical area, because it says, wait a second, I had it in my storage that this face looked like this. And so that facial recognition can get a little confused. And we even have now knowledge of people who experience face blindness. They can't recognize individual faces. I say all that to say, I'm a person who, if you change your facial hair or get new glasses, or change your makeup even, my brain goes, wait a second. I was firmly in the belief that you looked like this. So I was probably particularly sensitive to this type of trigger. Other people might see someone change their facial hair and it's not a problem. I say all that to say that triggers are particularly personal. But he came back from summer break with a mustache, and we even talked about it a little bit. In the beginning, I said something about, I see you have a mustache. And I was trying to get myself through the trigger, but it wasn't working. And he said, oh, yeah, I went on a hiking trip and came back with a full beard, and then I shaved it to a goatee, and then I, ended up with the mustache. But I just couldn't talk to him about anything important. And finally I said, it's your mustache. And I realized the whole time I was battling myself, and I was trying to trust him. I had worked with him for the entire year before. I had no reason not to trust him, but my brain was experiencing him as different. And so all those brain areas, the brain area that had learned to trust him, was now being triggered by this sensory experience of a visual change, and the amygdala is saying, this might not be okay. This might not be okay. This might not be okay. And there wasn't room for sort of my rational cognitive self to override that. And that's, to me, what a trigger is. It's when something happens in a time or space where there's probably a part of your brain that would be able to, if it could, say, let's think about this. Is this really what's happening here? Is this really what's going on? But your amygdala response and that entire limbic system response says, let's not take a chance. We better just lock things down and go into that protective mode. And that's what fight or flight is. We can protect ourselves by fighting, we can protect ourselves by fleeing, and we can protect ourselves by the fawning side too, which I think Chessie actually mentions in her book. And I'm really proud of her for adding that in, because a lot of people haven't brought that into the context yet. But smells particularly can become triggers, because the smell doesn't get processed through the thalamus, up through the cortex, then make its way back to the limbic system. Smell goes straight into the limbic system. And so it can have that direct effect on the hippocampus and the amygdala. And so many people will say smells are particularly triggering. And for me, men's cologne can be that. And so I have to watch out for that, because I'll find myself, especially in those early morning classes where maybe the boys do a little cologne instead of taking the time for a shower. And I have to really work hard to say, there's nothing wrong with him. He is just a regular person. He's the same person you were with last week. And if you can sort of preemptively know what your triggers might be, then you have sort of a better chance of having that rational thought override that limbic system response. And that's why trigger warnings are important. We're not saying if we talk about something in an English class that is reminiscent of your own trauma that you should leave the room. We're saying, let's let you know to get that rational thought process sort of up and running so that if the trigger hits, you have the chance to work through it rather than be overcome by it.
I know that Karen probably has so many follow-up questions to that because she is our facilitator that does a course for our students on trauma in the brain. And it's so important for everybody to understand the brain's trauma response and that fight, freeze, fawn, how your body responds. And Chessie actually talks about that for so long she blamed herself for freezing and she thought, why didn't I, do this or why didn't I do that? And even as an attorney, right? That's like in court cases, that's like the number one thing that is used by defense counsel, even though it's the body's complete natural reaction to, a fear of danger. So we really try to work with students to talk to them about that so that they understand it ahead of time, and Chessie says that when she sat in on this workshop where she learned about it, and she said it was the first time where she was able to say, oh, that wasn't my fault. That was my body protecting me. That was my brain protecting me and doing what it could to help me in that moment. And so we try to talk to students and educators and parents about it because one, if it happens to you, for you to understand that it's not your fault. And two, if somebody responds in a way that you don't understand, well, now you have an understanding of the brain and why they responded in that way that maybe you think, having never been through it, you wouldn't respond. So, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know, Karen, you probably have additional comments on it as well.
I feel like we could talk for hours about it and I would just learn so much. The smell, that's fascinating. I did not realize that. But I know that smells can do that for me, even a positive way. My grandmother and I were very, very close. She passed away in 2001, and I have a scarf of hers that is in a baggie, and it has retained the smell for all these years. And every now and then when I open that drawer where it is, I'll just smell it and it just brings me back. So for positive and for negative, those smells can get you. The interesting thing for me when we talk about our responses is how we respond to survivors, and not understanding the triggers is fascinating once you learn about why they respond a certain way. One of the biggest mistakes that I made was early on when my daughter disclosed to me, my first question was, well, did you tell him no? Because you're just supposed to speak up. And I didn't realize that I'd re-victimized her. She didn't know what had happened. Neither of us understood what was going on in her brain in the moment. There were just so many pieces to that. I could ask a million questions, but I'm going to jump ahead for a moment, because when we talk about things we're supposed to say, as a child of the 70s, like you, I resonated with a lot of things in the book, that things that you went through kind of as you would bring back up your child self. And in particular, it was the lack of understanding that we have about gender roles and the impact that they had on our upbringing. Much like in the feminist area of the 70s, we seem to have spent the 2000s telling women and girls they can be whatever they want to be. They can say whatever they want to say. They can stand up. And yet so many still recoil at the thought of standing up for ourselves, because that's not, as you say it in the book, what good girls do. You mentioned in your memoir that you had a hard time with this, specifically when a dean asked you to respond to a colleague's hurtful comments. And it brings back up that this isn't what we do. This isn't how you should respond. So as you know, as we present workshops to students, specifically when we present to girls and to parents, what would you say are key takeaways that we can share so that we can say, this is what we know now about speaking up, about standing up for what you believe, whether it's girls or boys. But in this case, because of the good girl syndrome, what can we share with them that we can say, here's what we know now. We didn't know it then, and here's what we can do differently.
Oh, Karen, that is a profoundly important question, and I do not feel like I have a answer that's equal to the task, but I am going to be thinking about this for a long, long time. So maybe we can circle back sometime, and you and I can talk about it more. But my first thought was, yes, we have done a great job of telling our girls it's okay to speak up. And I had that girl power t-shirt. It was my favorite t-shirt in my young life. And what I think we need to catch up on is to not only have the progress that we've made with our girls to continue, but to have the response to them speaking up be normalized. Because the response we get when we speak up is sometimes wonderful, with a good group of colleagues, and many times that requires a gender-balanced group that we're speaking to, where we don't feel like we're standing alone out on a precipice, but we feel like we've got our tribe behind us. But also that our institutions create the space for us to speak up, because what we're speaking up about is challenging structures at an institutional level. And institutions are, in my experience, and I don't think I'm unique in this, the absolute slowest to change. And so the times where I've put myself out on a limb, I have been rewarded for that. There have been many times. There have been times where, again, I felt like I had agency because I was only needing to assure that I was safe and secure in myself, not having children, not having a family that was dependent on me. If I stuck my neck out and I didn't get a promotion, or I didn't, get a merit raise that year, I was the only one who was going to be hurt by that. Which I will say never happened. So I don't want to act like my institution hasn't been supportive. Whereas other people had to think, if I speak up and there are consequences, I may be hurting my children, their ability to fill in the blank. You know more what that would be. But there are times where I spoke up and the response was just, we don't do that here. End of story. And if that's your first experience, rather than experience that happens sort of in your gradual effort to speak up in multiple times in multiple places, that becomes a betrayal. That story that we were told by our mothers and our grandmothers and our cohort of women and the leadership workshops that we attended, it becomes a, wait a second, you told me I should speak up and look what happened now. And that becomes very confusing if you try to speak up early on, either in your career or in your school time. And so I can only imagine for someone like Chessie, who spoke up so early in her life and had her story picked up by a national media attention. And, there's a continuum of that kind of attention, where the times when that speaking up got pushback and denied, how devastating that must have been, and how re-victimizing that must have been. That happens on a different level than, just sort of the interactions with the people who love you. You mentioned that when your daughter disclosed that, you said, why didn't you say no? My mother and I have had those kind of conversations, and my sisters and my family and I have had those kind of conversations. And I just want to tell you, as on the child side of the equation, those are much easier to understand and work through, because it's not this behemoth of multiple people and multiple voices. It's this one relationship. And working with a therapist, they can say something like, can you wonder a little bit about why that might have been your mom's response? And if we take that and build empathy from that, it ultimately helps us in the larger conversations and the larger spaces where we have to speak out. And so I think it's a both and. We need to have those one-on-one conversations and understand where those give us opportunity for growth, but also figure out how to use those to then prepare for the times where we're going to try and stand up and speak out. Because the individuals that we're all trying to educate, whether it's as a college professor or as a victims advocacy education group, they're going to face those too. They're going to face those moments where they're going to go out on a limb and they're going to say in their workplace, we need to consider the impact this might have on survivors or other people who are dealing with trauma. And when they get shut down or ignored, that can be so defeating. And so I think that just needs to become part of what we educate them for. We say, let's role play this a little bit, or let's do whatever it takes to prepare for the idea that we're going to get knocked down and we need to get back up again.
In my law practice, I represented survivors against either during like a Title IX campus rape disciplinary hearing, representing the survivor, even in litigation and against like large institutions. And they often say, it was re-traumatizing the institution's response. And some of them even said that the institution's response was even more traumatizing because they were supposed to protect them. And when you speak up, like you said, you're taught girl power and use your voice and be empowered. But then when you do so and people don't listen, it really can have such a silencing effect. I mean, even I can't help but thinking of, the results came out in the P. Diddy trial yesterday and how that re-victimizes every survivor because they think, look at the courage of those survivors. Look at those people that came forward and shared horrific things that happened to them. And then they don't get the justice that we deserve. Chessie recently said she doesn't call it the justice system. She calls it the legal system because a lot of times justice just isn't there. And even in your book, when you talk about statute of limitations, right? That's so many calls that I've had to have over the years of, people finally having the strength and sharing what happened and thinking they can pursue legal recourse and then to be told, no, I'm sorry, the time ran out, right? And there's a lot of work around that to change the statute of limitations, but there's so much work that we have to do within our institutions. And I really believe that awareness is the way to do it. And young people, getting to them as early as you can and raising awareness and through books like your own, where people can learn and they can understand. But like you said, they're the slowest to change. They really are. A lot of these institutions are very old. In your memoir, you share that moment you disclosed with your parents when you were just 10 years old, after someone visited your classroom and encouraged students to speak up if something like that ever happened to them. You describe how, both as a child and later as an adult, you carried the painful belief that you were responsible for the hurt your parents experienced after learning what you had endured. Through your work with Piper, you came to understand the deep courage it took to tell the truth and how your voice likely protected others. So I have a two-part question. One, just as somebody who goes into schools and talks with young people, what do you think that person said that encouraged you then to speak up? Was it the first time somebody had, brought that topic up to you, or was it something specific that person shared, or you were at a certain point in your life where you felt like you needed to share it? And then what guidance would you offer to parents or caring adults in the aftermath of a disclosure of how they can respond in a way that helps to make that young person feel safe and affirmed and free from the weight of other pain that others might feel, just by hearing what happened?
I appreciate that question, and I'll definitely want to hear Karen's side of the second question too, because I think it really is important for both the parents and the kids. My school talk, the woman was so calm, and it wasn't threatening in any way, shape, or form. And nobody would want to be threatening, right? They're coming in and they're trying to tell us that these things happen, and they care enough to do this hard work. But we don't know how kids are going to receive things. And so I think someone like Karen going back to school and getting the degree, or people who, feel that calling from the beginning to go into social work or psychology, we need our education to also be about that developmental stage that they're sort of specializing in. And so whether you're specializing in children and adolescents, or young adults, or, older people, because like you've said, Katie, there are so many people who don't disclose until they're well into adulthood. And so knowing your audience is always good advice. But I think it's particularly important for those educators. And I know just looking at the work you all are doing, you have very specialized and specific workshops for different groups. I think that's really important. But I also want to say that that right environment matters. The teacher who, and I don't want to mistakenly say her real name, so I'm not going to say her name, and I can't remember what I call her in the book just now off the top of my head, but she was that type of teacher who cared, that type of teacher who noticed things on her own. Looks like you're having a hard day today, or looks like we all need to just get up and stretch. I remember her, like, we weren't paying attention, we weren't focused, and just having us stand up and stretch a little bit. Like those teachers or other leaders who are showing you that they're attuned, you can trust them. Them being the ones who invite the outside person in sets that outside person up for a good experience. My response to that time, and especially my response to telling my parents, I think has to be explained as I was a super sensitive kid. Now we would use the term highly sensitive, right? But that wasn't what we called me. I was overly sensitive. That's the word we used back in the 70s and 80s for kids like me. I also lived under the fear of a very vengeful God. And that is something that I have to, work through and reconcile, that sort of spiritual trauma as well. And as you said in the beginning, my abuser was very highly regarded in our church, and was a very powerful person, just in his personality and in his role in my community. And so that probably added to my fear. Because anytime I was confused, my default state was, is this something bad? Is this something that could get me in trouble? Is this something that's sinful? And so I'm not sure if any other students in that room that day were survivors, and whether they, talked with their family, but they maybe had a very different reaction. So I think one of the things that we as educators can do is, again, knowing your audience, recognizing, and maybe this is kind of through case studies work in the preparation of people who go into these spaces. What do we do if we're talking to a very defiant student whose trauma is manifesting as sort of that aggression and defiance? What do we do if we're talking to a survivor who's very highly sensitive? And so I think that's part of the thing we all have to take into consideration. But also, my parents knew me. They loved me to death, but they also knew me. And one of the first things my mother said was, this couldn't have happened to, how did she say it? Now I want to say it just how she said it. This couldn't have been worse for anybody but you. Does that sound right? Does that feel like the way to say it? Because she knew I was just that type of sensitive kid who took everything to heart. And so she was ready to respond to me because she knew me very well. And that's where I think, oh God, and it breaks my heart to have to say this, but there's so many kids who can't disclose to their parents because their parents are either knowledgeable of and or the abuser. But that's where being the person who a kid can go to, whether it's a parent, whether it's a close friend, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a teacher, we just need people who are willing to do that hard emotional work of building the trust and being the type of person who somebody can come talk to. And maybe what parents can do, and this is off the top of my head, I haven't thought about this before, is cultivate those relationships for their kids. Because my mother often talks about her aunt, who was pretty close in age to her, who was the person she would go to if she had questions, because she was the oldest in her family. And so I think about how her mother, helped to cultivate that relationship with her aunt so that she knew she could go to her and talk to her if it was something she didn't feel like she could talk to her mother about. So yeah, maybe that's something to think about. But I'm interested in hearing Karen's side of that as well.
Well, I know that when we go and speak to parents, it's part of my favorite workshop that we do because it gives me the opportunity. It is like a little mini therapy moment, but I have the opportunity to say, hey, here's where I did mess up. Here's what I didn't understand. And when we know better, we do better, or we hope to do better. And so as you talk about being a safe person, we do talk to parents about that. We talk about being a trusted adult. And I feel like as the mom in the situation in my family, I experienced both sides of what you shared. We are religious. We belong to a higher demand religion. And I was always the mom that said, you can tell me anything. And the dichotomy, I think, for my daughter in the moment, and for her, it was a boyfriend, and it was somebody she deeply cared about. And so that added another layer. And so I think just as we talk with young people and as we talk with parents, it's talking about the different layers that can exist and that every situation is different and that every situation does require a trusted adult, somebody you can go to, whether it is a parent or someone else. My daughter recently shared that she felt like if I had been with the knowledge that I have now, and she doesn't say it in a negative way, but just that if I had the knowledge back then that I have now, most of her friends would have been safe from these situations, or at least would have known who to talk to, because I was the mom among her friends that said anything and everything around them. And I asked them all the questions and I knew what was going on. I loved being the driver because I heard all of the things, including their silly songs as they sang to the radio, but I also really got to hear what was going on with them. And I would have, interjected more information if I knew it. And so I just think giving ourselves grace is so important, and not just as survivors, but as the parents of survivors, to be able to say, I didn't know better, and now I do, and here's how I'm going to make a difference.
Katie, I'd love to hear your side of that too, as a mom of younger ones. How do you feel like you're preparing for And that the work you do is preparing you for the hopefully day that never, ever, ever comes. But where your kids have to tell you something that feels scary to them or confusing to them or overwhelming to them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just emotional even thinking about that. So my son is 8 and he is a very emotional, sensitive, sweet boy. And my daughter is 4 and she is a firecracker. She's so much fun and just she's very much strong in who she is. And I don't want that to change for either of them. So I think parenting is just trying to encourage them to continue being themselves in a world that tries to tell you that you should be everything else. But the conversations that I always have with my kids is you can tell me anything. I'm always going to be on your team. Even if somebody tells you that you can't tell me, still tell me. Like, we'll figure it out together. And just constantly reminding them, and not in a scary way. I never want to scare my kids, but I also want to give them the tools and just know, like, I'm always going to believe you. I'm always going to stand beside you. And even if it's something hard, like, you're not going to be in trouble and we'll figure it out together. And just really showing that to them in even like smaller ways, right? Like if they're dealing with a kid who maybe isn't being the nicest at school, like helping them navigate that and just honoring their feelings. But yeah, really reminding them that I'm always on their team and also talking honestly to them. Like if my kids ask me a question, I promise always to tell them the truth. Like even if it's a tough question and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're 7. Like, how are you asking me that question? You shouldn't even know that question yet. Obviously, if they're asking me it, they're ready to hear the answer. And so just being honest and them knowing they can come to me. And also, I'm a huge proponent of talking to kids about body safety and consent and, all of those things very early on. And another thing I tell my kids, which maybe is controversial, I don't know, but I tell them, like, even if it's an adult, and even if it's an adult that you're supposed to respect, whether they wear a badge or they're a religious figure or they're a teacher or they wear a white coat because they're a doctor, you can say no to them. You can say no to them and you can scream and yell until they get mommy or daddy in the room. Like, that's okay. And, I told my son that before he even went to kindergarten. I was like, I'm probably the only parent putting a kid on the bus saying, like, yeah, like, be kind and respectful, but also you don't have to listen to anyone if they're telling you to do something that doesn't make you feel safe. So constantly having those conversations because I want to be a mom that, like you told your mom and Karen's daughter told her and Chessie told Susan, and just I want to be a mom that my kids tell. Like I have a wonderful mom that I tell everything to, and I want to be that kind of mom that my kids, know is in their corner.
I think that's probably the most important thing we've heard in this whole podcast, because that's how things change, right? When we change the culture, we change the whole response. And, we think about what did we hear as kids about people who are in authority. And that was not the message that parents were being told to tell to their children. And so that change, I think, is so important. Even the idea of, saying, would you like to give grandpa a hug? Would you like to give, rather than give, is so empowering for kids. And knowing that their response and their agency matters more than anything in those moments. I had a lab exercise where we were testing knee reflexes. And just as a little experiment of my own, I'd said to the students who were all pre-med, they're going to be working with people, they're going to be touching their bodies. I said, every time you're going to tap this hammer, you are going to ask permission before you do it. And it got a little funny, because it was a little redundant, but they're going to remember that moment. And making those kind of moments memorable, I think, is important as well. So I'm going to work really hard to find places and ways in my my work to help prepare students for that, even as doctors, because boy, when are we less empowered than when we are laying in a hospital bed with that horrible gown on, and these people are just coming in and taking our blood and all of the things. So we can make that a universal way of showing respect and giving people agency and power.
100%. My kids know what consent means. They know that they can say no. Even if grandma or grandpa get upset that they're saying no, that they don't want to hug, like, we're going to stand by them in that always. And we also firmly believe in, doing it all through school, but also medical schools. And I think every lawyer should have to take trauma-informed classes. Like, being trauma-informed should be in every aspect of life, because most people have encountered some kind of trauma in their lives, and just being able to be kinder to one another would make this world a much better place. So I have 2 questions for you as we wrap up our call. So one thing you stated at one point in your book, and it was really beautiful and powerful to me, and I really felt it. You said, "I find myself compelled to call for a societal level reckoning on behalf of all who limped towards safety on still growing limbs. But I am afraid, how will this anger not consume me? Worse, how will I cope if no one listens?" Like I said, I felt it in my core when I read it, because I think that that's something that survivors are still grappling with every day. And I'm constantly, wanting us as a society to do better, to believe survivors. And we've come a long way. We have, but there's still so much work to do. But I wanted to ask you, what gave you the courage to write this book and publish it despite those fears? And is there anything that's giving you hope despite all the awful that we're seeing in the world?
Thank you for asking that and for pointing out that place in the book. It's one of the most important writing experiences for me. It was very healing to even put that into words for myself. And I did start writing this book out of desperation. It was never intended in the very early days of writing that it would ever be shared. But as I was working through and finding this, sort of therapeutic writing so helpful for me, I found that the more I tried to be precise with my language, the more I tried to be exacting with my language, the more I was understanding my feelings as well. And so I would just encourage anybody who already has a sort of propensity toward journaling to revisit what you've written and do a rewrite, because it will help you to experience that better and deeper understanding of your own experience, even if you're not ever planning on showing it to anybody. But the moment this became a book for others, rather than just an exercise in trying to help myself, was, as I say in the book, Piper and I did a lot of time where I read things out loud to her. And I think because I was trying to write it well for my own self, but it gave her the chance to hear writing that was a little different than that sort of first just venting the words, sort of expunging them from yourself kind of writing. And so she was so encouraging and complimentary. So she set the tone so that when she said the words that mattered, I was ready to hear them and I was ready to believe it was possible. Because she said to me, "Have you ever considered sharing this?" And I couldn't put this in the book because I was just feeling too much humbleness about it. But I said, I don't know who would want to read this. It's horrible. It's awful things, And she looked me in the eye and she said, "Stacey, there are millions." And it was in that moment, and I think there was a little bit of a divine spark in that moment as well, that I realized I had been waiting for and looking for something in my life that was going to feel more fulfilling and more important than all the work I had ever done. And I have a wonderfully fulfilling vocation. So it wasn't out of a desperation to try and make my mark in the world. I already was making my mark in the world. But this became something different. And yeah, that was the moment when I realized there was a chance to make connection. And I will say the connections that I have made through this book in just the short time it's been out have been wonderfully affirming and full of grace and not at all overwhelming. And for anybody who's thinking about putting their story out there, get the guidance that you might need from a therapist or a writing coach or a professor or whomever. But do it in such a way that you feel like you are comfortable. I was not going to be comfortable with a big New York publisher, or I did not have the bravery that Chessie showed by going on, was it the Today Show or Good Morning America or both? I can't remember which one it was. But in a little quieter way, my book is making its way into the world, and having the chance to be on podcast is a great fit for me. So I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm just going to keep showing up. Mother Teresa has a great quote: "We're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful." But if we are faithful, we can be successful, and we can recognize what success looks like for us, because we can be successful on many different levels.
I just want to say that I agree with Piper's thought that there are millions of people who need to read this and who can be touched by this. And early on in your therapy, Piper asked you to name some women you admire, and you named about 10 women from present day all the way back to Abigail Adams. And I don't have a question here. I just want to let you know that I would, after reading your book, add your name to that list. The bravery that you showed, you do show what your readers need to see as true courage. And I thank you for that. It was truly impactful for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That touches my heart so deeply. I appreciate it so much.
Now I'm getting emotional, which is very beautiful. I'm so grateful for you and for your bravery in writing this book and sharing it with the world. And I share it with everybody I talk to because it really is so powerful. Something we're starting is at the end of each podcast recording, we're asking our guests, just like we ask students when we go into the rooms with them, to finish the sentence, "I have the right to." So based on today's discussion or your journey or just something you want the world to know that they have the right to, how would you finish that sentence? "I have the right to."
I have the right to accept your compliment, to accept your acknowledgement of my bravery and my courage, and thank you for the chance to say that, because that is a growth moment for me. It can be very hard to acknowledge when you've made an impact, and you're helping me recognize that this book is making an impact. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you. Your honesty, your vulnerability, your strength, all of it has left such an impression on us. And I imagine listeners are feeling what I'm feeling right now, which is a deep sense of connection, of being seen, and possibility.
You've not only shared your story with incredible courage, but you've helped give language to things that so many survivors struggle to put into words. And that is a gift. And it's one that will ripple far beyond this episode. And I'm going to just add to every survivor that is listening, you are not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. You have the right to speak up. to take up space, to feel joy, to feel believed, and to heal on your own timeline.
To all our listeners, we hope today's conversation gives you insight, validation, and maybe even a little peace. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to pick up a copy of Stacey's book, Dispatches from the Couch, a neuroscientist and her therapist conspire to reboot her brain. It's a masterclass in honesty, compassion, and the science of survival. We'll be back next time with another episode that inspires and challenges us all to keep moving forward together. Until then, remember, you have the right to. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire, the I Have the Right To podcast. Visit IHaveTheRightTo.org to learn more about our programming for students, educators, and parents, as well as internship opportunities. And don't forget to follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Until next time, stay empowered and keep the conversations going.